Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Patricia Coughlin. First of all, I want to wish everybody a really happy holiday season. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas. For many, it's been a tough year, and in some ways, there's no end in sight. So it's really challenging us, right, to be resilient. And one of the blessings of this time has been having everything go remote. And so I've been able to do webinars with participants from places like Iran and Nepal and India and Australia. And these folks would have had a difficult, if not impossible, time trying to travel to get to me. So it's been wonderful to meet you all in these virtual Zoom webinars. I just wanted to kind of wrap up the year by answering some questions from subscribers. And the one I'm going to talk about today is the difference between transference neurosis and enactment. That's what somebody asked. So let's start with transference neurosis. Now, transference neurosis is something that develops in the patient over time in an analytic treatment. And to some extent, this is allowed to happen, or it's kind of nurtured by abstinence, right? There's this idea that the therapist can somehow be neutral, even though in reality there is no such thing. You know, if you go to a therapist and they have a blank face and they don't say very much, that's not neutral, right? You're going to have all kinds of feelings about it. But in any case, in a full-blown transference neurosis, all of the unresolved infantile feelings, fantasies, conflicts from the past regarding primary attachment figures gets transferred onto the person of the therapist. So the therapist becomes the most important person in the patient's life, and often the patient will, declare that they are in love with the therapist and that the solution to their problems would be to have that love returned. So, in the early days, Freud thought this was a good thing, that the patient would essentially repeat, with you, these infantile fantasies. But over time, he became increasingly pessimistic about actually being able to work through and resolve a full-blown transference neurosis. And in fact, Dr. Davenlow, who I trained with, was quite opposed to allowing a transference neurosis to develop. Instead, he had an eagle eye out from the start for manifestations of transference feelings, transference behaviors, so that they could be brought out into the open and the conflicts around them resolved as quickly as possible. And as that happens, as those distortions in the transference get addressed and cleared up, the therapist becomes who they are, a helpful person, not a stand-in, right, for someone from the past. So again, I don't think there are too many practitioners these days who would actually advocate for the development of a full-blown transference neurosis. It can really become an entanglement that's difficult, if not impossible, to get out of. Now, how is that different than an enactment? An enactment actually takes two people. So an enactment is something that happens. It's kind of a transference, countertransference interaction between the patient and therapist. And it can simply be around something specific. So instead of a full-blown transference neurosis where the entire, infantile, the difficulties, Freud had a quote, a new edition of an old disorder or something like that. So this doesn't have to be the full-blown neurosis, but one particular type of interaction. Let's say the patient tends to be passive, helpless, and really encourages other people to come in, as the savior. And so if the therapist on a particular day, falls for that and actually enacts that dynamic, right, with the patient, instead of catching it, bringing it to conscious awareness, looking at how that, helpless, dependent position is ultimately harmful to the patient, they can inadvertently enact that. So it really is that kind of interplay between the pull, right, of the patient's defenses and the therapist responding in kind instead of responding differently and providing a corrective emotional experience. So these two phenomena are very different, right? Transference neurosis really is about the patient, whereas an enactment involves both patient and therapist. Transference neurosis is the full-blown, disorder, whereas an enactment can just be around something quite circumscribed and specific. Hopefully, even if the therapist initially falls into the trap of buying that the patient is helpless and they sort of come in as the rescuer, they can catch that and adjust. Otherwise, you're going to end up developing a collusive alliance, which is something I'm going to talk about in the next video, how the therapist can end up actually colluding with the patient's defenses. So I hope this distinction between transference neurosis and enactment was helpful. Again, I'm grateful to all of you who subscribe and look forward to continuing our conversations in 2022. Thanks. Bye-bye.